do the announcements. Scott, take it away.
All right. Hi. Sorry, guys. Let me see if I could get this slideshow play from start. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Do you see a line through your screen, this bar?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
All right, good. I was like, I got this far now. This is going to happen. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened there. My computer just denied access to Zoom. I don't know why. So I apologize. Thank you for everybody who's still here. I'm Scott Mazzella. I wrote Surviving Sandy, Long Beach Island, and the Greatest Storm of the Jersey Shore, and I co-wrote Great Storms of the Jersey Shore, second edition. But my full-time job is middle school history teacher in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And I do public relations for the district as well. So thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to jump right in since everybody's been waiting. So you're here probably because you love storms, I would think. And storms mystify us. Storms stop us in our tracks. You know, some people hide when a storm comes. I was never that guy. I was always running to a window, or worse, I was trying to get outside and lightning. And my mom used to yell at me, you know, come back in. So storms are the kind of thing that we all share collectively. This picture you see on your screen, that was taken on Long Beach Island a couple summers ago. There was a shelf cloud that was heading south down the coast. It was coming from a relatively strong thunderstorm to the north, but the way it looked going south that way, that it almost looks like the edge of a UFO or something coming down. A lot of people took pictures of this. I saw it all over the place on social media. And it shows you how storms really just can stop us in our tracks sometimes. There's Basking Ridge, another kind of shelf cloud. Same kind of thing, you know, people today, we all have our cameras on our phones. It's easy for us to stop and take pictures of weather and then put it all over social media. That wasn't always the case. We have photography from some of New Jersey's greatest storms. I'm going to be showing you a lot of pictures of damage and destruction on the Jersey Shore, but what we tend to forget are the humans involved, the human element involved. So I wanted to start off tonight with some pictures of people who are in various states of shock or awe or curiosity or humor when it comes to weather. Now, this first one obviously is a little girl who's probably confused as to why her home is damaged or destroyed. Her place of vacation and paradise probably gone, and she's probably sad and wondering what's going on. Whereas you have some humorous pictures like this. You see this guy smiling. He's in Beach Haven in a typical high tide flood where water comes up through the storm drains. This is more like curiosity. You have surprise, like this gentleman looking at what's left of a house after the nor'easter of '62. You have people who pose, like here's a police officer and a woman on her, what used to be her garage. That was an enclosed garage. That vehicle was inside the garage. And you can see they're smiling for the camera, kind of like, hey, we're at the beach. This happens at the beach. You see various people here. Some look sad, some look curious, some look shocked, some look sad. This is Longport after the '44 hurricane. This guy walking up to the Beach Haven, I'm sorry, the Ship Bottom Circle on Long Beach Island, just found out his house was washed out to sea. And obviously he had a lot of emotional attachment to the house. And so it goes, you know, the human element. Here's some kids playing with an old police car. To them, it must have seemed like a magical world after the storm, everything completely in disarray. But the adults, I'm sure, knew what was going on and how bad it was. Now, why do we even put ourselves into this situation? You hear people all the time arguing, you know, about stopping building on the shore, stop development at the shore. But as bad as storms get and as destructive as they get, most of the time we're enjoying the reward of the beach, right? We go to the beach for vacation. We have our favorite spots. We swear our spot on the Jersey Shore is the best one in the whole state, right? We know what it's like to feel the sand in our toes and that warm surf on our bodies swimming and such. So the reward is always greater than the risk, as long as there's money to fix your houses, of course. All right, so the risk was known for a long, long time, all the way back to the beginning of our nation and beyond that. Native Americans would have had to deal with this sort of thing as well. We aren't going to go back that far, but here's a look at what I call the highway off of the Jersey Shore, where you can see the paths of the most powerful hurricanes. If I put all the tropical storms and all the hurricanes into a graph, there'd be too many lines. But this graph, which was put together for us a few years ago, shows the most powerful hurricanes. And you can see most of them go from southwest to northeast and stay offshore. Usually at this time of year, we have a Bermuda high over the Atlantic Ocean, in which tropical systems like to go around. And sometimes they get close to us, really close. Sometimes they skirt the coast. Irene certainly scooted right along the coast and inside the borders. But I bet there's one there you could see that didn't follow any rules at all. And that's the one from 2012. And that's, of course, Superstorm Sandy, which went completely against all the rules and went perpendicular into the Jersey Shore, which is the worst case scenario. And here's what I was talking about with the high pressure. Usually storms steer around that. Sometimes they scoot. If you mind me asking, can you see my cursor moving on your screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you could see that. Sometimes they sneak through. Like right now, we have a pretty active start to the hurricane season. We have a storm that's probably going to go through the Southern Caribbean over the Isthmus of Panama and straight through. But if they're a little farther north, they tend to go around the high pressure systems. And sometimes they get close, sometimes they don't. But when you look at all the storms since 1893, major storms, this is, only 3 made landfall in that whole time. So you had one in 1903, and you had Irene that made landfall in 2011, and Sandy, which wasn't even classified as a hurricane when it made landfall, but it made landfall in 2012. So a lot of these damaging storms that you're going to see, they weren't even direct hits. They were brush bys going up the coast, and they could do tremendous damage too. All right, so here's an old lithograph of a storm up near Sandy Hook. You can see the guests only sign. The artist probably put a little tongue-in-cheek reference there. Here's Atlantic City. And you can see the remnants of the boardwalk, the old boardwalk. Look at the piles they have there, still have bark on them. That's a really old section of boardwalk. Oops. Here's Corson's Inlet, Strathmere, early 1920s. Now, we could go all the way back to colonial times, and there are actually quotes from some of our founding fathers, especially Alexander Hamilton, who wrote in his journal about these fierce storms at sea. So even back then, the people were enamored with the weather. I mean, weather impacted the economy, impacted trade and travel, of course. Ben Franklin, as you all remember, had experiments that involved weather and conducting electricity and things like that. So the fascination for weather has always been there. All right, I want to talk about the hurricane of 44. This was the benchmark storm pre-1950. And this one skirted the coast. You can see this is its path here. But look at the damage it did. Here's Brant Beach. This is Holgate. Holgate is the southern tip of Long Beach Island. This Coast Guard station, the life-saving station, this Bonds life-saving station, this and this row of houses here are all still there today. As far as I could tell, nothing else here is there anymore. You can see most of it was destroyed. At this point, you see people looking through, not anymore for survivors, but rather to find the bodies of missing people. Here's the one road that goes down to that section of Long Beach Island. Here's Ocean City. This is up on the Bay Shore, Kingsburg. It's west of Sandy Hook. Here's some girls sitting on what's left of their home. Looks like the first floor was destroyed and the second floor collapsed to the ground. I want to read you briefly an account. This is from Elwood Barrett, and he witnessed what looked like a tidal wave that went across Long Beach Island and did a lot of damage. You see on your screens. Now, they said tidal wave, but it's more likely it was storm surge. They didn't have the word storm surge back then. So here's what he wrote. We saw the wave come over the island and go across to the mainland. It took what it took. A single wave, just one big wave. I think it, as the crest of the wave passed by our house, it was probably 8 or 9 feet high. You could see it coming from way out, and it came at one shot. The beach at the time was relatively steep and wide, and to come across the beach and pass by our house at 8 or 9 feet, that was a hell of a wave. When that wave got to the mainland, it turned around and came back. I think people at the time said that the return of the wave did more damage. It just sucked everything out. The boats from the bay were now at the beach. So that's pretty classic description of a storm surge and how it would behave. And that's what happened in the hurricane of 44, which is just crazy, right? Like, you think you'd be safer a couple blocks in, but in this case, people were not. Although Holgate was maybe a block and a half wide at that point. Here is Harvey Cedars. All right, so here's this was before 44. This is 1935. I think my slides got a little mixed. Barnegat Light. So you can see just buildings collapsing. Doesn't take much water for this to happen. And so on. It's Beach Haven. There were pictures during Sandy, even about 12 to 24 hours before Sandy's center even made landfall, pictures of Beach Haven looking just like this. All right, so the next benchmark storm, the one benchmark prior to Sandy, is the nor'easter, the 3-day nor'easter known as the 62 storm, or the Ash Wednesday storm. That happened on March 6th, 7th, and 8th, 1962. Long Beach Island, once again, was like one of the hardest hit. They lost 270 homes. Doesn't sound like a lot because there weren't as many homes back then. If the 62 storm were to happen today, it would have maybe have been a different story. The 62 storm was not a hurricane. It was not a tropical storm. It was a nor'easter, which is an offshore low pressure system. As you can see on the screen here, you get a setup where a low pressure system is off the mid-Atlantic coast. And in the wintertime, you have a blocking high pressure system that often forms up towards the Canadian Maritimes. And that can block the progress of low pressure going out to sea. The pressure difference between these two systems creates strong northeast winds that push water for hours, maybe a day, and in this case for 3 days, straight into the East Coast, right into the Jersey Shore. So every high tide brought more and more water with it onto the Jersey Shore, into the back bays, flooded up the back bays. The water couldn't escape, and it just got worse and worse. And every high tide got higher, and then you had waves on top of it, and then you had homes being destroyed. And that's exactly what happened in the '62 storm. So Harvey Cedars was hit terribly by this. An inlet formed on 79th Street where the ocean met the bay. It was deep enough to be navigable, not that any boats were navigating it, but if you could imagine where there was once land, there was now a navigable inlet within hours. See a house floating there. This picture was taken from Harvey Cedars as well. This is the Harvey Cedars Bible Conference. A lot of people evacuated to that building. It was the biggest, strongest building around that area. And they took pictures during the storm. And you could see houses floating. You can see houses on piles in the distance. Here's another one. You can see houses in the water. Once your house is detached from its foundation, it's going to float away if the water's deep enough. Now, what you might notice are the houses that stayed put. They're on piles. And that was a relatively new technology in '62. The houses that had pilings stayed where they were. And the mayors of Long Beach Island decided very quickly and very smartly to have all those homes piles braced with X braces right after the storm so they wouldn't wobble and fall down. Today, you have to build homes on these piles. Here's that inlet I said formed at 79th Street. The mayor of Harvey Cedars was Thomas Buchholz. His daughter is the co-author of Great Storms of the Jersey Shore. She said the only time she ever saw him cry, there he is there, was when he came back to see Harvey Cedars. He owned a dredging company, and he had his dredge company start working on the inlet right away to fill it in while he flew to Philadelphia to meet with the Army Corps of Engineers to get these roads opened up. And you can see he was successful. If you look at this picture, you can see a lot of damage, but you can also see clearly where they bulldozed the main road to get emergency crews and construction crews in there. But what you also see in this picture, which is incredible, is the huge amount of fanning of sand, the sand that went from the beach to the bay. Barrier Islands naturally want to move westward over time, but we stopped that with jetties and construction and development. So when these big storm hits, naturally they want that sand to go to the bay and form the island a little bit more west. But with all the houses on it, we obviously don't want that to keep happening. But you can clearly see that in this picture. The same thing happened in Sandy as well. So here's a house. This was a house that Margaret Thomas Buchholz, my friend and fellow author, she was evacuated to this house in a previous storm. And in the '62 storm, it was destroyed. I believe it was owned once by the vice president of American Express. Here's Brant Beach in '62. More LBI. Another house destroyed. This one's interesting because the floor accordioned down, but left everything on the wall. So if you look closely, everything's still on the shelves. No problem. The whole house was gutted. Here's a even better view of the ocean meeting the bay in Harvey Cedars. And an action shot during the storm. You can see waves in the streets, this cape falling into the sea. Split capes, just roofs. And again, you see this house is okay. It's on piles. one of the curiosities of the 62 storm was the beaching of the USS Monson, a destroyer that was being towed north, and the lines broke during the storm, and she ended up beaching on the southern end of LBI. And it brought a lot of gawkers down to take pictures with it. I think we have a picture. There's one taking a picture with the Monson. The mayor, police chief, and I believe a press person actually went down to see this during the storm, and they were all killed. They drowned when their amphibious vehicle fell into a piece of missing road, and they drowned. This is the souvenir booklet of the 62 storm. It happens to have my parents' beach house on there. This is their beach house, and this is where it was, and this is where it ended up. And they just moved it back. It wasn't their house at the time. Oddly, the outside staircase stayed where it was, but the house went. So I don't know what that staircase was made out of. A better shot here. Here's the staircase and the front slab. And the house went across the street. Still there, survived 62 and Sandy, and now it's 14 feet higher up in the air on piles. And a lot of these houses are still on that road despite being washed around. There's that staircase. All right, so that was 62. Now, then we have 50 years of relative quiet. Not that there weren't hurricanes, because people are going to say, well, what about Donna, or what about Floyd, or what about all these other ones? What about Bob? Well, there was nothing as significant as 62 in the next 50 years. And two things happen there. You have a Jersey Shore populace that is growing tremendously. The amount of development that is happening is astounding. They're filling every inch of available land with homes. Sometimes they're ripping down homes to build bigger homes. And then later, those homes, they tear them down for even bigger homes. And the whole thing, the whole cycle kept continuing. And you had more people and new generations come in who never heard of these storms, never experienced these storms. And that developed a sort of complacency over the years. And it just kind of set things up for Sandy to be as bad as it was with all that development. Here are some notable storms from that 50 years. You had Belle, Gloria, Charlie, Bob, Floyd, and then of course Irene. Irene was kind of a dress rehearsal for Sandy, and I'll talk more about her in a second. But we did have a couple nor'easters that did scare people, like the nor'easter of 91, the perfect storm. That did a lot of damage up in Massachusetts. But we had the Halloween storm of 91. We had other nor'easters that come through in the winter months and do damage. Flooding, sometimes destruction, certainly beach erosion, which is always a problem. All right, this is Irene's track from 2011. Everybody thought Irene was the one. I remember watching the news, and they had helicopters filming people preparing. They had people boarding up. Everybody thought this was going to be the biggie that we were overdue for. And as she approached New Jersey, she approached from the southwest and was much more weakened than anyone expected. She was a tropical storm. She made landfall near Brigantine and kind of went right up the parkway up into New York. Now, for the Jersey Shore, there was flooding. There were some problems, but it was nothing the Jersey Shore hadn't seen before. Where Irene did most of her damage was in the northwest quadrant of the storm, where there was all the rain, and you had massive flooding up in North Jersey, up in Central Jersey. I remember seeing pictures of Route 18 in New Brunswick looking like a lake. There were homes well inland, river, close to river flood zones that were damaged. So I don't want to take anything away from that. It's important to understand that Irene was a deadly storm. But what Irene did at the Jersey Shore was not terribly significant. And a lot of Jersey Shore homeowners who went through a lot of ordeal prepping for this kind of went, oh, we did all that for kind of nothing. And that's going to play a role in Sandy, because you tend to react to storms based on your last experience with one. And for a lot of people, it's going to be Irene. When Sandy comes along and they go, well, remember Irene, they told us to evacuate. Well, why should we? And that kind of thing. So Irene becomes a little bit problematic because of what happens a year later. All right, Sandy. Clearly, Sandy's direction, her path was way different than all the others. When I was a kid, I went to an Army Corps of Engineers presentation because I was a giant weather dork even when I was like 13. I went to these kind of presentations. And I distinctly remember them saying the worst case scenario would be for a hurricane to come perpendicular to shore. And then they said, well, that never happens because they always go southwest to northeast and don't worry about it. Well, here comes Sandy really, really late in the hurricane season, right knocking on the door of Halloween. And the typical summer weather pattern with that Bermuda high no longer exists. It's more like the one from 1962 with the blocking high pressure to the north and Sandy coming up and having no place to go. You can see this image of Hurricane Sandy. Sandy's cloud canopy was ridiculously large. It was over 1,000 miles wide. We were cloudy here long before the storm ever got here. Sandy did do a lot of damage and was deadly down in Bermuda, Jamaica, the Bahamas. I'm sorry, not Bermuda, Jamaica and the Bahamas, where people lost their lives. There's a lot of property damage. We tend to forget that because we focus so much on what Sandy would do later. Sandy gets to the mid-Atlantic and starts to peter out as a hurricane. It no longer is classified as a hurricane. This is long before it makes landfall. Now, that's what caused all this damage with Sandy. You have a tightly wound Hurricane Sandy now weakening, and that central core where those winds were blowing the hardest is now starting to unravel, and that wind field is spreading out, and it's spreading out over a much wider area of open ocean, that fetch of sea, and Sandy's momentum is going towards, it takes a turn towards the west. And now that momentum with that expanding wind field, even though the winds aren't as strong as a hurricane, they are strong enough to push that water. And now Sandy's pushing the seawater towards shore. And that's why we saw a lot of back bay flooding and street flooding well before Sandy even made landfall. So Sandy was not a hurricane at landfall. The forecasters were really having a hard time getting this idea of what Sandy was to the public. I think in the early on, they called it Frankenstorm. That didn't really stick. Then they decided on Superstorm to try to get people to realize this is not a regular thing. This is not a nor'easter. This is not something to shy away from. You got to take this seriously. And actually, the National Weather Service Chief Meteorologist Gary Zakowski in the Mount Holly office in southern New Jersey, he actually put a personal plea to the public saying this is not something to take lightly. This is 1962 all over again. So if you know somebody who survived 1962, the 62 storm, go talk to them and see if they'll stay. And he was, it's unusual for a person of his stature in a scientifically based government agency to put out a personal plea and say, listen, this is, you need to be thinking 62 storm here. You need to go look that up, okay? Because that's what's about to hit you. And so that he really wanted people to get out of the shore. Now, Sandy makes landfall and puts millions of people in the dark almost immediately. And when power starts to come back, people look up at the news and they see some of the most disturbing pictures of destruction that they've seen in quite some time. Like here, this is of course the Jetstar roller coaster, which was washed into the sea as the boardwalk that was on was undermined. There's another picture of it. In Manilokin, you had 2 inlets form, 2 breakthroughs. Here's the bigger one. the chief of police, the acting chief of police during Sandy, he evacuated the department to Manilokin Road, to the Towboat US building. That's where they had staged their police department during the storm, and they saw a bunch of activity going towards Manilokin over the bridge. So they raced up the bridge to see where they were going, and they discovered that a big chunk of their town was missing. So that was pretty horrifying to the chief there. He was right at the top of that bridge looking down. It was nighttime. All he could make out was a huge pile of debris at the bottom being pushed up by the water, and a whole part of town where there were once houses, nothing. They lost 65 of those houses. And if you know Manilokin, those are big houses, expensive houses. This one house in the middle stayed. The story goes, the guy saw that particular spot was higher than the rest, so he built his house there. Today, this is all an intersection, and where the waves are behind it, that would be Route 36 today, or 35 today. Here's Ocean Grove during the storm, during Sandy. This is Holgate. That's how much sand fanned from the beaches of Holgate towards the bay. Massive amount of sand. This is the Seashell Motel in Beach Haven before Sandy and after Sandy. The bartender there was checking on some of the outlets. There's water getting in some of the outlets of the bar. They were moving a beer cooler from the bar. The bar's behind these glass windows behind the pool. And the storm surge hit right when they were doing that, busted through all these windows, and they got trapped under the beer coolers. They were in the middle of this, and the fire department came and rescued them, got the beer coolers off of their feet. They couldn't get out. They thought they were going to drown. Union Beach, that's a bayshore town, just next, kind of between Keyport and Keensburg. This building was destroyed by the bay's wave action. The bay, Raritan Bay, looked more like the raging ocean, not like a bay. What was happening was the water was, storm surge water was being funneled up and around Long Island and Manhattan, and winds were pushing it straight down into the northern shores of New Jersey, which we call the Bayshore area, from Perth Amboy to Sandy Hook. And it just did an immense amount of damage. This town is not a resort town. This is a blue collar town. People live here all year. So for the water to do this kind of damage, it was destroying people's entire lives, not vacation home life. In the book, Great Storms of the Jersey Shore, the second edition, there's a story about a couple who lived in the house right about here, this area here. They stayed through the storm because water never made it past their driveway apron, and they figured it would never get worse than that, and they were very wrong. Water not only came up to and over the apron, it came in all around the house and eventually entered the basement, and they evacuated to the apartment over their garage, which is on a slab, and they watched their house get destroyed from up there. And they watched as the bay came through their front door and took their belongings out the back door, photo albums, trinkets, then bigger things like doors, and then the refrigerator, and then the washing machines and beds and everything. So that was heartbreaking for them. And they weren't safe in that garage for much longer than that, because the garage was undermined underneath them, and they ended up while still in the apartment fell down into the water, and it became a kind of like a boat. They had to jump off of that with their huge not mastiff, Pyrenees dog, which they took along with them, trying to get to their neighbor's house to be rescued, which they eventually were. This is where they were. This is what was left of their house, and this is what was left of the apartment. And they made it to the house here. It looks more like tornado damage than hurricane damage. Of course, not everything is a nor'easter or a superstorm or a hurricane or blizzard. We have just good old fashioned thunderstorms that we deal with. I do not recommend going on the beach and taking pictures like this one. This is Matt Riddiger. He's a friend of mine. He's crazy. Don't go on the beach and do that. You don't want to get struck by lightning. He did get this cool picture though. We've had other storms come through too. We had Tropical Storm Faye in 2020. And interestingly enough, and forgive me if you work for the Brigantine Chamber of Commerce or anything, but Faye, Sandy, and Irene all made landfall in the same little area. Could you believe that? They all came through right here, one spot. I would never take that bet, but that's what they did. We also have troubles with storms that don't even come off the water. Here is Isaias. You might remember that one. It put a lot of people in the dark, created a lot of tornadoes. All those red lines are tornadoes that were spawned by Tropical Storm Isaias. You might remember seeing damage in Malika Hills. That they have video of the tornado coming through there and just destroying these large luxury homes. That's New Jersey. Today is an anniversary of a major derecho, which is a kind of long-range storm that stays together for hundreds and hundreds of miles and can cause a lot of damage. We had one about 10 years ago, not here, not in Union, and not where I am right now, which is Mattawan, but much farther south, more like Atlantic County and south. One of the interesting things that we found that derechos can produce, if in the exact right moment, in the right time, is they could create a medio tsunami, which is a tsunami that is not produced by an earthquake or any sort of land movement. It's pressure based. When one of these major storms goes out over the ocean, it changes the pressure over the surface of the ocean, which makes it bow up and down, and that could sometimes create a wave, which makes it to shore. Now, most of the time, it's a negligible difference. Only really computer detecting systems detect it. But sometimes, if you're at the exact angle, the right angle, it can create an intense wave that can do some damage. And that's what happened in 2013. It was a beautiful day in Barnegat Light after a morning of storms. Those storms far offshore created that ripple effect with pressure change, and Barnegat Inlet happened to be just the right angle for this wave to come through and grow, and it created a very brief medio tsunami in Barnegat Inlet that washed a whole bunch of people off the jetty who were fishing. It hurt people. It was a pretty intense experience. And interestingly, at the exact opposite angle, if you think of like a circle, and Barnegat's here, and then up in Massachusetts, there's the other like corresponding angle. The same thing happened in a marina there. And that was all caused by a medio tsunami induced by a derecho. So some interesting weather in New Jersey. And of course, we also have water spouts and tornadoes and all that good stuff. So in 1999, I was down in Holgate when a tornado ripped the roof off a motel that was occupied by a lot of summertime residents. I remember running or taking my bike down there and seeing the damage. Pretty crazy. So, all right. So that is your great storms. I hope I fit that in the right amount of time, because I know we lost time in the beginning. So I went a little faster than normal. I hope you don't mind.
I think that was great. Can we get off of the share screening, and I will send how to get the book along with a follow-up letter. So I promise to send that to everybody. And Donna's this beautiful picture. So now is the fun part where we, of course, open it up. I'll send all of this information in a follow-up letter. So Scott, can we go back to seeing you?
Yep, there we are.
Okay, All right, I guess we should go back to, okay, I'm back to. Okay, so my question is, who has questions? Are there more storms now than there were? Is there any sort of indication that the weather is changing?
I always get that question. I would say no. Um, the severity of storms might be getting worse, but in terms of there just being more storms, there could be more storms because it's a cyclical thing. Like if you look at how many storms there were in the late 1800s and even like early to mid 1900s, you see kind of spikes. So we might be entering like a busier time, but not, you know, anything unusual in the bigger picture. Now, the severity of storms, that seems to be changing as the climate warms. Storms that feed off warm water, like hurricanes, can get worse. So we have to watch out for that. And
I have a question.
sure.
It's Jim DiGiovanni. I have a question. Does anyone have a video of the storm surge from Sandy? I've been trying to see exactly what it looked like. Somebody said the storm surge just emptied the bay, went all the way out to the west, and then came back.
It didn't empty the bay. It went over the bay.
When I say empty, it was probably exaggeration, but
Yeah, there's no way it emptied it, but if you could imagine the surge going over the island, destroying houses and taking all that debris with it over the bay and hitting the mainland shore towns. That's why you saw a lot of what looked like shrapnel damage and stuff on those homes. They're being hit by waves and debris. But the bay was flooded and it stayed flooded all the way through that. So the surge was kind of on top of it.
but the surge didn't come back toward the island after going west.
It would have done that. It would have come back. In Sandy's case, I don't think it was as bad on the way out. In 44, they thought it was as bad on the way out, but during Sandy, it didn't. I don't think I've ever seen a video of that. It was dark out when landfall happened.
Yeah.
So if you want to see a good video of what, like the power of some of the later waves were doing, someone on YouTube does have from Union Beach, took a video from a house that would eventually be destroyed. And it's one of the craziest videos, just seeing the water smack the bulkheads and the buildings and knowing that everything in that video is going to get destroyed later. You don't see that. But even where the camera guy is going to get destroyed. They evacuate. So look for that. I don't have a link or anything because I haven't looked it up in a long time.
Thank you very much.
Union Beach, check it out.
So Anne says Ida was for us in New Jersey was called Remnants.
Remnants. Remnants are after a tropical system is died. We can still get heavy rain and thunderstorms from the system, which remains a low pressure system. It's just not strong enough to be classified as a depression or a storm or a hurricane.
So I have a question. Why do you think people are so fascinated by storms?
I think they're the one thing that's really bigger than all of us and unpredictable. And well, they're predictable, but I mean, despite all of our technology and all of our progress as a species, we've never been able to control the weather. And I think that just mystifies people. I still get a thrill, like I'm 10 years old, when a nice bolt of lightning like is in the distance or that big rumble of thunder shakes the house. I get my wife calls it storm mode because she tries to talk to me and I don't listen or I'm just like, I've got to go, she calls and all my two kids also go into storm mode with me now. So she's mad because now nobody listens during storm. So I think it's just, we're fascinated with it. It's amazing stuff. It's beautiful stuff. As long as you're not stupid and you're out there being dangerous, it's just mystical. And if you look on Facebook, when there's a huge storm, everyone will be talking about it, right? Like,
right.
oh, hey, that storm, it's the thing that unites us, and God knows we need a lot more to unite us these days, right? So weather still does it.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask or put in chat? I know we have a very famous quote from Superstorm Sandy from our governor.
Get the hell off the beach. That one.
Get the hell off my beach, right?
That was Irene. Um,
Oh, sorry.
said that the year before. I think he kind of paraphrased it during Sandy too. But he was right. Get the hell off the beach. So not everybody did. And if you want,
No.
there's so many stories in our books here of just people's.
Do you want to hold them up, please? Hold up your books.
This one has my notes in it, so it's got a lot of bookmarks and stuff. But this is the second edition of Great Storms of the Jersey Shore. And of course, I don't have Surviving Sandy on me right here.
Oh, well, I will send,
It's right
if you-
there.
if you send me images, I'll include them in the follow-up letter. And the
Yep.
follow-up letter will also have the recording on it, which I'm now going to stop. As soon as I figure out how to do that.
Believe it or
Stop.
not, this book, the original book, the first edition, I got as a 16th birthday present from my mom.